Right, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this next session in the ISTA retreat. It felt inappropriate for any event of any kind to not have a session somewhat to do with AI. And whilst we have dealt with AI extensively in the past two retreats in different ways, we thought that there is an interesting point of reflection that maybe is happening right now that is to do with the fact that a lot of the promissory work around AI that has been sort of exploding over the past few years is now starting coming, the wave is coming to a crest and sort of slowly starting to crash down. And of course, this is an opportune moment for people from STS to jump in and actually offer some interesting insight as to, what's the discrepancy between the expectation and reality, what's hype and fiction, and what is actually going on, and there's a productive tension to explore there. Now, this isn't necessarily new, but we hopefully, across this session, are going to, explain a little bit from our own points of view as to how these things look like in practice, put forward some interesting frameworks as how you can think of this in a more theoretical way, reflect a bit on the deep history of that. It's not a new phenomena, both the study of AI as well as this particular thing happening in the field. And then finally, we're going to open up a kind of an interactive discussion with everyone around how do we all collectively see sort of AI featured in this science and technology development progress narratives, and what can we collectively and how do we collectively explore that gap, that productive tension for STS research. And I'll start off because, as many of you know, a lot of my work is in sort of the space sector and space industry, and it takes a very kind of global, in fact, slight provocation, transplanetary view of technological development, and increasingly also there's another part of what I do, which is looking at AI development in practice, especially the way AI and arts interact as a way to sense the future, as a way to maybe explore some of the challenges and issues, as well as expose some of the problems that are already there. Now, on the transplanetary side of things, again, as a sort of part provocation, part inspiration, we've actually been working with some colleagues on frameworks around transplanetary ecology as a current manifestation of what space exploration and all this sort of techno-scientific narrative of the final frontier is doing. There have been various kinds of iterations of where this frontier is and what it looks like, and it seems that there is a sort of a systemic, very much data and kind of view of what roles space and space-related assets play. That is, kind of specifically looking at this sort of ecological view that encompasses the whole of the Earth and beyond. And that beyond is a very interesting place to explore. In more practical terms, what we're basically seeing is large-scale infrastructure and interaction of large-scale infrastructure, which each have different kinds of socio-political dynamics and also different kinds of footprints. And in that interaction, again, you have this sort of core tension between, well, where's the, what's the visible and what's the invisible? And here, of course, lovely session just before us, right, in terms of imagery and mapping and how we actually construct understanding of systems, infrastructures, both in social and technical sense, and you have this kind of ways in which we try and portray what the world's connection with outer space and assets and infrastructure that planetary scale looks like, as a way to control that narrative, as a way to explain things in particular lenses. And the interesting thing is, of course, that the vast majority of the more directly impactful stuff actually these days happens at increasingly at the point of use, right? At the point of where we all interact with this space data and space assets and things like that. So it's no longer, when you talk about sort of astronautics, launching things, etc., you're talking really about military-industrial complex. And of course that still goes on, yeah? That's how we get assets into space. But increasingly, the more powerful uses of that data and also the most contentious uses of the data actually start to happen in closer and closer to, into the realm of everyone, right? Where both our lives get governed increasingly by space data. I don't know how many of you, I drove here and I did switch on the navigation, the Google Maps, just to kind of make sure that I can, track traffic and stuff like that. But that's effectively, that's me being tracked, or rather, me tracking satellites in order to determine my position on the surface of the Earth as a way to get between A and B, right? And if computer says left, I go left. If computer says right, I go right. Of course, you can rebel against that. But in a very mundane, everyday sort of way, we've kind of got to the point where we're actually domesticating a lot of this technology. And it's thus becoming increasingly more, from a kind of a sociological point of view, it's becoming increasingly an object of inquiry. And then you have this sort of stuff, the promise that actually using satellite data will enable global problems, right? So on a bigger scale. So this is a paper by colleagues actually here at Edinburgh who've done some work using satellite data, mapping flooding in Senegal. Then they've also that's related to investment, all sorts of kind of global structures. And this kind of echo a little bit Steve's talk from yesterday morning when he talked a lot about sort of carbon sinks and the way that kind of co-production of science and policy has kind of evolved over the past 3 decades, and how increasingly that co-production is also impacted by technology in a very direct ways, and the ways in which sort of the point about automation, the fact that they had to kind of sidestep the fact that they're on one hand saying we're automating data analysis and we're automating ways in which this stuff is being done, but on the other hand, we're still negotiating politically that. And of course, I had a kind of a strange déjà vu, because Morgan was also mentioning when talking about universal credit in a similar kind of way, that the automation of the process is both politically, is the desired goal politically, as well as the ready excuse for why things can't be done. And so it becomes, very, very essential as to how that automation, in this case, maybe it's also some dimensions of AI, is considered to shape that narrative, and who determines what AI isn't and isn't what it doesn't do. A neat example that's very direct, Sustainable Development Goals and the data within Sustainable Development Goals, where actually if you look into the various indicators, there's a bunch of them that if you want to track them on a global scale, you need the data on the global scale and analysis on the global scale. And that usually means satellite data and machine learning, machine vision analysis, right? And so, and there's interesting stuff like, for instance, you say, well, it's very hard to track things like global poverty levels, right? That's a legitimate point. In many places in the world, they don't have very accurate demographics data. So, come in geoscientists and they say, well, actually, there's all sorts of interesting proxies. Like, you can measure how many rooftops there are in comparison to cars parked in front of the rooftops. And you can kind of calculate how many people per car, and that's an indicator of disposable income, and we can use it as a proxy to try to understand poverty in places where there aren't other census data, right? And you can stack this and stack this and stack this and stack this. And I was actually sort of excited and privileged to be in the engine room of this project. This is the beginning of this project, when something called Frontier Development Lab, which is a kind of a sort of a hackathon type project, was looking to branch into Europe, or rather was invited by the European Space Agency to set some challenges for like a hackathon type endeavor in Europe, because it was the idea was like you get a bunch of teams and you set these different challenges, and there were 3 challenges, and one of them was literally called Mission Control Earth. And they basically, in the brief for this challenge, they describe, well, what we want to see is, we want to see proposals where AI workflows automate the task of large-scale multispectral data fusion and change detection to allow a strategic overview, more coordinated responses, targeted warning, and quicker deployment of help and aid. So basically saying, well, actually, you have this data streams from space and possibly also other sources. It's not just space, it could be other stuff. it goes into a big black box. That big black box churns around, and it brings back basically saying, well, there's going to be a migration crisis here because of water shortage, or there's going to be a war, or there's going to be this, or there's going to be that, right? And it becomes this sort of semi-predictive, semi-kind of analytical tool, which of course it could be immensely powerful, right? And this is the, and they weren't necessarily, they weren't treating this just as a thought experiment, right? They were very, very serious about European Space Agency, especially their Earth observation people in Frascati. They were very much excited about getting to work with, and they've pulled together all of the influential kind of, people like NVIDIA to do the graphics cards, sort of high processing, IBM, then of course the data providers, to kind of say like, well, this is very serious, right? We want to actually make this thing happen. They've done, in a hackathon sort of way, they've actually done it. They've got some proposals out of there. I don't think any of them actually turn out into actual functional things, but nonetheless, this is definitely the dream. And you don't have to go as far as Frascati in Rome to actually see specific examples of products like this actually emerging in this sort of policy/science marketplace, right? So this is kind of public policy arena, but provided by private companies and powered by scientific expertise. So this is map of London. So what they've done is they've overlaid energy emission data. So basically they look from space and you can see thermal emissions. So you can see basically how poorly insulated houses are. And they've overlaid that with the demographic data of where people live, roughly what their incomes are and things like that. And they basically said, well, people with poorly insulated houses and low income are at risk of energy poverty, right? And you might. And they're like, well, you see, where the big towers show up is basically these are the boroughs where you have a problem. And then they then have a case study. They've actually worked with some of these councils and boroughs to kind of try and say, well, this is where you're going to have a problem. And lo and behold, when the war in Ukraine, because this predates the war in Ukraine, where the war in Ukraine started and the energy prices rocketed, this is exactly the boroughs in London where they were basically, from field work, from social, social services, sort of the caseworkers were actually seeing energy poverty crop up, right? So it can have quite a sort of strangely, eerily linear effect. So that then starts to validate that these things do work. And at this point, you're kind of having this sort of uncanny valley where actually the sort of hackathon proposal, which was kind of all nice and kind of just conceptual, does have very, very direct, real sort of impact on the world. And it reinforces the idea that these things kind of exist and are possible. And as I said, at the center of it is a big black box. Now, I was thinking of making the provocation about experiential AI now, but I'm actually thinking probably the best thing to do is to pass over to Andrey, who's going to explain a little bit more as to the morphology of how these AI systems become, this kind of paper over the gap, or rather, how do we maybe expose where the gap actually is, and then we maybe come to the experiential AI later, if it makes sense. Okay? Yeah? Try to do this as smoothly and seemingly as possible.
Thank you. Cheers. Are we there yet?
Yep.
Hello, hello.
It works, it's fine. It's just
It works? Yeah, sure. Good. All right. Hi, hello. My name is Andrey. I am a former PhD student. Thank you. I was going to say I am a PhD student, not anymore. Thanks, Robin. For the last couple of years, after my PhD, I have been working in several projects related to artificial intelligence from a STS perspective. First at the School of Informatics, and recently in the Usher Institute in the School of Medicine. What I'm going to talk today is about what is before artificial intelligence and what is beyond artificial intelligence, like a way of extending the conversation beyond that just modeling. I don't know if you know this case, but it's a very famous case about IBM Watson. At some point in 2011, IBM Watson put IBM put this technology, Watson, an artificial intelligence engine, into Jeopardy, this TV show for questions and answers, and believe it or not, Watson won that season of Jeopardy. That created a huge phenomena and a huge expectation, particularly in the United States. And suddenly, all of a sudden, artificial intelligence was in every newspaper and every tech magazine, and making a lot of promises around how to help business and businesses and organizations. And one of the most promising areas was healthcare. One of these organizations called the MD Anderson Center, one of the biggest oncology centers in the United States, made a huge bet around this technology and make a lot of promises, like we are going to be able to cure cancer in some years because Watson. And so a lot of money was put into this project, a lot of effort. But this started in 2012, 2013. But some years after, 2016, Watson was experimenting many problems. The technology was not in production yet. No patient has been attended with this technology. And one of the problems here was the lack of integration between Watson and the current infrastructure of the hospital. Of course, this derived in a huge scandal because, in part because of the promises made before, but around all the issues related to return to investment expectations from stakeholders and shareholders, and the reputation of the hospital was damaged at some point. One of the issues here, because there have been some papers and reflections about this, is that this hospital entered too quickly in a moment when Watson technology was not yet mature. And integration was a huge part of this story. If you look at the, I also do some teaching in business school as well. But if you look into organization studies, type of business school literature, most of the most recent books are going to tell you that some of the fundamental challenges around organizations when they're facing digital transformation tends to be related to scale, how to deliver more value to more people, maintaining a cost-effective relationship, how to create broadness and diversity in the attention. It's related as well to evolution, learning, and agility, and also value creation. That is very much the type of things that you can find in this type of literature. That is good, but I think a broader conversation needs to be done. And here's when we put artificial intelligence in the equation. And if you see these numbers, this is from last year for the United States. About 80% of all AI projects have failed in the last year. And around 40% of companies has wasted money because one of these, of the projects of artificial intelligence has failed as well in the United States. But when you reflect a little bit more on the previous step, where is the potential of digital technology? One of the potential here, of course, they have capacity and potential for changing the operating model and the business model and the value propositions, but the real potential, the true potential lies in achieving convergence between these technologies, the old and new, and the organization existing capacity, infrastructures, and processes. When you put the zoom into an organization, any organization, you're going to find most of the time multiplicity of platforms, multiplicity of data, inconsistencies of data, and most of the time loosely integrated information systems. And this presents pretty much a huge limitation for more complex and more value added to those data, particularly when you are thinking in data quality. That is a critical condition. Good data, integrated, curated, cleaned, for the pathway that follows cloud computing, business intelligence, artificial intelligence, new uses of data. And this critical condition is something that most of the times you don't find much in literature that refers more on the potential, the expectations, as Matt mentioned it, and the further uses. And data quality, if data is the new oil, that oil needs to be good oil, and data quality is critical. And in that matters, interoperability, the capacity of integrate and connect different systems and make these systems interact is also a critical condition for a healthy infrastructure. But this infrastructure, as you see here, can easily be taken for granted. It's like if just you need to add a new layer called artificial intelligence, and then all of a sudden, all the problems are going to be solved. And this integration is not that simple, and may not be as direct, simple, or obvious sometimes. And if you see this, this is from The Economist as well, when they ask top executives about the 3 challenges that have an impact on artificial intelligence initiative: legacy systems, expertise, and communication between experts. They have some sort of similarity between the answers, but legacy systems came on top. What is the condition of this? When you are trying to create an infrastructure, this is from my PhD, by the way, an attempt to create a regional integration of primary, secondary, and social care data in a region in England, NHS. When you see how fragile these models are, and that fragility is dependent, most of the in part, because the dependency of the current infrastructure. So a slight change in any part of this can have a huge repercussion and implication here, and maybe not be so obvious to find and figure out what is happening. That is one challenge as well. The other challenge here is try to create or imagine new services around these technologies. And this is another project Robin and I are working on, which is part of bigger team as well, but it's about retina imaging for early dementia detection. That seems like a great idea, and a good idea, of course. But how to transform, how to create a service, a cost-effective service around this idea? And if you look at the people and potential stakeholders, there are going to be multiplicity of agendas, visions, and expectations. It is not clear how to create a service around this. It's not clear yet what are the implications in many dimensions: ethical, clinical, organizational. Where to start? How to create an ecosystem around this? With whom? How to articulate incumbents, new entrants, new stakeholders, how to create cost-effective value, how to put together, for example, new entrants like ophthalmologists with neurologists for early dementia detection. What does early dementia detection means? In their 20s, 30s, 40s? When? What does that mean for the rest of the healthcare systems, already saturated? So many questions that we don't have an answer yet. And another challenge is not just about data sourcing and plumbing, but also, or modeling, but also the challenge of explainability. And this is an infrastructure for another case around from a company in Edinburgh, and they're trying to create a model for estimate the risk of exacerbation for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And they have done the plumbing, they have done the modeling, but one of the challenges when they're trying to put this into clinical practice is explainability. How to explain the results or the scores from the models. How to create trust on the result. How to make clinicians trust on the results and the number that this is produced, and how to create actionability from this. This is a broader technological space and landscape, of course. I am finishing now. many technological options, often with multiple promises, multiple and diverse expectations, diverse visions. One of the challenges is when you talk about creating a new service or working with a company is, but what is the return of investment? Well, that is not so easy to estimate when you have so many questions around. And part of the challenges as well is that most uses and implications of these technologies are not clear enough. And imagine and articulating new ecosystems based on still immature technologies or promises is really complex. And this is a call for a need for a broader and reflective conversation rather than just plumbing and modeling. And I think that is where STS can have a big role in this conversation. And I like to finish this with this quote. We live in a Star Wars society with godlike technology, medieval institutions, and Paleolithic emotions. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I've spent the last, I don't know, almost 10 years of my life bothering with AI. So I'm kind of, my sentiment right now is like I want to have done with it. Like it's enough. My presentation follows up a lot from the last part of the discussion you guys had, so I'm really excited about this. In the last couple of years, I've been going back to some of my initial questions when I became interested in AI, like how would a broader sociology of AI look like? So when we talk about AI and we come here as social scientists, what are the key kind of initial steps that we have to follow? And today I'm going to talk about how I came back to some teenage readings of mine about an Indian logical framework, logician framework that I think is relevant to the analysis of AI. So back in 2014, I was a jobless information scientist in financial crisis Greece, and that was the same year that Stephen Hawking said that AI will spell the end of humanity. So it was either AI or me. So I had to do something about this. And it was the same year that I encountered Rulger's 1985 paper, Why Not a Sociology of Machines, that kind of laid down some agenda points about how to do a sociology of AI, actually. So today I'm going to talk about the importance of adopting analytical frameworks allowing us to capture AI, not only as AI, but also when it's not AI, or when AI is irrelevant, but it's still there, when AI is meaningless, when AI is hegemonic, and when AI is useless. So a little bit about my PhD work. So when it comes to expectations, I defined the role of expectations as a dialectic between expectations and expertise. So Hawking kind of shook me a lot when it came out. And then after Elon Musk started talking about AI, other people, more and more people started talking about AI. When I came to STIS, I encountered all these frameworks, the sociology of expectations, the studies of expertise and experience, and these two frameworks kind of resonated a lot with me, and I started treating them as a dialectic. So the more kind of expert you appear to be in something, the more prestigious you are as an expert, you're able to shape the expectations, but then the more appropriated certain types of expectations are, this also shapes the kind of expertise we value in something, and AI in particular. Typical example from last Monday, that's from iNews. Revolutionary AI trial offers breast cancer hope for millions on NHS, reveals Sunak. I don't know if Sunak has a PhD in AI or something. Yeah. The final part of my PhD was this sort of quadripartite model. You cannot take it away from my brain nowadays. Every time I see AI, I see these four things. I see how we conceptualize AI, what names do we give to it, what kind of descriptions, what kind of metaphors we use, what kinds of motivations do we have to do AI? Is it curiosity driven? Do we want to create an artificial human? Is it commercialization, applications? Is it pure kind of grant driven ref kind of impact oriented kind of use up of the term? We have regulations. So AI entered policy as of 2015-16, very bad early rounds of AI policy shaped by non-AI experts. Now we kind of move into a more interesting kind of round with the AI Act and recent documents and expectations. So the futures of AI that we imagine shape how we conceptualize, how we motivate ourselves, how we regulate AI. Okay, enough with this. So I'm going to stay a bit more on the conceptualization part today. So language. There's always some point in every discussion about AI where somebody will ask, okay, but how do you define AI? Right? I think that any of you who have had this sort of kind of relation with AI, you've encountered one of these meetings, and then the meeting is meant to last for 60 minutes, and then you spend 40 minutes trying to define AI, and then there's 20 minutes left, and then you kind of question yourself, why am I here today? So I started, the more I dig into AI, I treat AI as a sociology of language. So going back to Wittgenstein, is it a language game? Is it something that, you know, we play around? Is it like a maze, a city of words? I read last year, the best book I read last year was Thomas Kuhn's Last Writings, his unpublished book, where he talks a lot about linguistic socialization. Harry Collins also talks about that. Is it a Foucauldian discourse of power? So the way we talk, our words have power and we dominate, we become hegemonic about it. Pinch and Biker, interpretive flexibility. You just give AI to a person, then they interpret it flexibly and they do something with that. Again, the role of metaphors, very powerful. And the role of invisible or alienated labor in visible social groups. So those who shape AI but are not using the term. I am an invisible social group in the bicycle case because I don't know how to bike, but I am shaping that discourse because I'm a non-buyer, right? And then I'm reading about all these frameworks, and then I realize this ancient 6th century BCE Jaina framework of this sort of pluralistic, onto-epistemological kind of approach is probably, in my view, the best way to examine this AI discourse from a non-one-sided perspective, to help people conceptualize, understand, and deconstruct AI at the same time. That's how it looks like. It's simple and complex at the same time. So what you need to remember about this framework is that all these are conditionals and they happen simultaneously. For any concept you can imagine, any concept, any being, anything. In some ways it exists, in some ways it does not exist, in some ways it exists and it does not exist. In some ways it exists, but it's indescribable. In some ways it does not exist, but it's indescribable. In some ways it exists, it does not exist, and it's indescribable. In some ways it's indescribable. So that's 6th century BCE India. I think they invented STS. Sorry. So in some ways AI exists. Yeah, it's here, like the panel here. We're here for some reason, right? So AI is everywhere, right? So it's part of our everyday language. It's a social, political, and cultural activity, right? So let AI do the thing. Put some AI in your application, whatever. We've got AI institutes, AI research units, AI ethics committees, ethical AI initiatives, AI for social good, military investment in AI, healthcare AI, green AI, responsible AI, all the technological determinism we know. We've got regulations, policies, mostly downstream, pro-innovation, national strategies about AI, industrial challenge funds, all about AI. And AI is also an established discipline. So Jamie Fleck has written an amazing paper in 1978, 79 in my view, about the development and establishment of a scientific field, people wanting to define their field, to create their boundaries and say, this is our field that has different sub-disciplines, symbolic AI, sort of give instructions to a computer to complete a task, that's deductivism. Sub-symbolic or connectionist neural networks, give me the data and I will give you the pattern, sort of inductivism. And now we've got generative AI, this sort of remixing kind of style, I guess abductivism. We've got specific definitions and textbooks, we've got sort of schools of AI, and so on. In some sense, AI does not exist, right? So AI is unachievable, impossible, it's inconceivable. We don't, if you ask cognitive scientists, if you ask neuroscientists, we don't know what intelligence is, right? There's no, it's one of the big questions in science. So how can you have AI and you use that in your everyday language so easily when you don't know what intelligence is, right? In STS, we know very well that the divisions between artificial and natural are very artificial and very social. So we use these terms to define different things. So either artificial or intelligence are contestable as terms. There's the uncontroversial thingness that Lucy Sachman recently talked about, that AI has now become a thing. Instead of a science, like physics, now it's a thing. Put an AI there. Let the AI do the thing. Some people will say AI is just advanced statistics. AI is just advanced automation. AI is just lumps of machinery. When people talk about AI, they actually mean the internet. These are all from my interviews. You'll get people to say, you'll never get actual AI. And when they say that, they mean what other people have come up with terms like superintelligence, artificial general intelligence, ultra intelligence. So this sort of artificial intelligence as something that is beyond human intelligence. So for them, the tools, the AI tools that we create are not AI. Also cross-reference the politics of the AI should not exist, so the risk-oriented approach to AI. Now, in some sense, AI exists and does not exist. The term was conceived in 1955 as a proposal for a summer school. And they needed a flashy term to get the money. So that's how the term was invented. But it was always a conjecture. So AI is, so according to that proposal from 1955, this study is to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. So it's something about the future. Artificial intelligence, the science of making machines do things that would require intelligence if done by men, because women did not exist. Later on, AI can be defined as the attempt to get real machines to behave like the one in the movies. AI is whatever hasn't been done yet. So AI is always a motivation to do stuff, to train machines behave like humans. And that creates what Robin has described as an eddy of motivations. So people gather around, they create hype around the possibility of doing that, and then they mobilize different curiosity-driven motivations or more kind of applications-driven motivations and profit-driven motivations to do AI. In some sense, AI exists, but it's indescribable. So AI is a processual banalization or invisibilization. What do I mean by that? There's this concept of the AI winter that after moments of excessive hype and expectation in AI, there's a trough of disillusionment. People lose faith in AI, and then there is no more funding. I've studied that concept a lot. It interests me a lot, but I also criticize it. I think that what I found out in my PhD was that during the so-called AI winters, the technology and the processes are still there. They change names, and they simply continue in different ways. The continuation of AI by different means or by different names. So this is closer to this other idea of the AI effect, a folk theory in AI that says that as soon as AI achieves something, it's not considered to be AI anymore. So these computers, this entire set, if you show that to the 1955 guys, they would be like, yeah, this is AI, but we don't call it AI. Maybe in 10 years, ChatGPT, we don't call it AI anymore. We call it something else because it's just so banal. And we also have what I call the instrumentalist contextualization, that AI experts, when they have their specific fields, for example, machine vision. If you go to a machine vision conference, you will not need to define your machine vision AI because your colleagues know what you're talking about. So you don't really care about defining but the AI is still there. In some sense, AI does not exist and it's indescribable. So AI as its non-AI technosocial underpinning. So these are the things that finally in the past 5 years people started studying more closely. So as soon as AI matters, has material substance, it does not exist anymore because people responsible about our AI may not care at all about AI. What do I mean by that? So this AI myth veils the underlying infrastructures, the value chains, the materialities behind the cloud, the computational labor, the moderation practices, the optimization, the e-waste management that is usually distanced from AI terminologies as such. So if you work at an e-waste management site in Ghana, our colleague Joyce Serwa-Opong is about to submit her PhD on that, you don't call what you do AI. You just want to get the copper out of the cell phone, right? So this is not AI, but it is AI because it gives the existence of your AI. So we've got this with my colleagues Benedetta Katainen-Zariti and Lara Del Molin. We're now writing a paper on this sort of tension between bridging the digital divide, so bring AI to everyone, but also the possibility of refusing AI. We had enough of this, we don't want to call this AI anymore because it kind of alienates us between each other. In some sense, AI exists and does not exist, and it's indescribable. So AI becomes affirmed through its variational negation. What do I mean by that? Well, 1955, why 1955? All these concepts about AI, they have been there, well, not forever, maybe forever, I don't know, but forever is a big word. But there have been many ways to talk about the same things before the term AI was invented. So before AI, we talked about robots, we talked about electronic brains, we talked about thinking machines, we talked about automata, we talked about complex information processing, and all these ask the same questions as AI did. Contemporary to AI, there were alternative approaches to AI and alternative names. Cognitive sciences, computer science, machine intelligence, knowledge-based expert systems, neural networks, bots, virtual agents. And for many reasons, social reasons, these people were aware of the AI debate, but they intentionally distanced themselves from the discourse because of different individual or small collective disagreements or different social and historical circumstances. And now we are able to talk a little bit about post-AI. We've got many cases where authors who are critical about the concept of hegemonic AI. They want to appropriate these kind of means of computations, and they talk about tactical AI, using these systems against the hegemonies that create them and sustain them. Creep AI, ways to make AI accessible to different social groups, and at the same time building them in different ways, design them in different ways. Indigenous AI, not starting from the typical white Western male sort of perspective for doing AI, and so on. Finally, in some sense, AI is indescribable. One of my favorite papers, 1980, Sherry Turkle, Computers as Rorschach. So Sherry Turkle said, when interviewing people about their relationship with computers, nobody knew how a computer works, unless you were a nerd and you were one of the people who owned a computer and you kind of got interested in that. If you didn't have an initial when you had your initial response to it, it was like a Rorschach, it was like an ink blot that the psychologist would show to you, and you could project your hopes and fears on. So Turkle in 1980 said that. Turkle in 2006 says that robots are also Rorschach, and later on I said that AI is Rorschach. So everyone talks about AI, but essentially what we do is that we project our own fears and our own hopes onto AI. AI practitioners, at the same time, you know, during my historical research, I found this 1990 conversation across many AI specialists who kind of felt that we need to redefine our field. So they started expanding, and they said AI is about mathematics, AI is software engineering, AI is linguistics, AI is psychology. So they started seeing AI as the central field that shapes everything else, which is extremely interesting. Or at the same time, one of my interviewees concludes after a long kind of sort of diss against AI that AI is just a morass. So, and she is one of the greatest AI experts I've ever met. This is speaking to your comment about the sort of moving definition from, say, 1972 to today. This is my little sort of moving social groups and limitations and obstacles, but I'm not going into that. Happy to discuss over a coffee. Yeah, so we're all here to study all these liminal nuances between these predications, between these conditionals. When we do a sociology of AI, we need to think, how is AI being defended? When is AI invisible? What processes become invisible when we say AI? And it requires lots of effort. It requires a sort of hyper-heightened awareness of things that happen in the world at the psychical, the social, and the environmental register at the same time. It's a hard task. It's a very hard task. But AI is such a big umbrella term that encapsulates so many things, but it's also cheapened by being used in our everyday discourse, that our responsibility is massive. And I'm thinking with Jane Calvert and Lola Olufemi when it comes to otherwising. So we need to find ways to think otherwise. So do we want to abolish AI? Do we want to say that I don't want an automated GP on the phone to help me with my problem? I have the right to refuse. I have the right to say no. Do I want to have a different term? Maybe we shouldn't call it AI. Do I want to think in any other way? Yeah, please do. And that's, I think, our position here. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Matt. Well, where to begin? We've had a real romp through three very different perspectives. If I can perhaps have a riff on just what I've learned and heard, based on the fact that in 1978, I would maintain as the right, I first did postgraduate work on AI from the perspective of sociology of scientific knowledge. And I took the field, I wanted to find out where it came from. And that has given me a basis, I suppose, to interpret and understand what I've heard. Now, Matt talked about space, and what that conjures up in my mind is the term, when he's referred to transhuman, as well as being a very ripe field for application of AI and data analysis, which undoubtedly is going on. There's a bigger question, and that is related to the immensity that space astrophysics has taught us about the world. That we are very, 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 I can go on forever, very small parts of that world. And therefore, from an STS point of view, I think it's incumbent on us to recognize our smallness in the vastness of space. I mean, we talk about we are on the fringes of the galaxy, but there are clusters of galaxies, and there are superclusters of galaxies. And within that, we're very, very small indeed. And I think that the AI conversation is opening our eyes up to the possibility of a bigger intelligence or way of understanding the world out there. That's a main point I think I drew from Matt's comment. Andrey talked about a very practical, probably the most promising application of AI, namely healthcare. And I think you're absolutely right to put your finger on the infrastructure there. I was at a meeting on AI by IT specialists, and one person there, an American who was of Indian extract, was commenting that there are something like 700 odd companies involved in AI, but most of those are special AI, like targeting drug discovery or medical thing. And he reckoned that that's where the real potential for AI was going to come from. Not from the 17 or so large companies using generative large language models, the so-called general AI. I think what I got from your perspective, Andrey, was that we should look from an STS point of view and resurrect an understanding or an analysis of what Chris Freeman called many years ago the productivity paradox that surrounded IT. For many years, companies were investing in IT, but they were not making any productivity or efficiency improvements until relatively late on. And I think the perspective that's good to analyze that is Carlota Perez's analysis of long waves of technology development, where she suggests that every technology that comes along requires an appropriate set of organizations, infrastructure, before its full potential can be realized. And until that happens, you have many firms losing money, much investment going in and then collapsing, and you just have to think recently of the dot-com boom and bust. And yet the internet has continued growing and becoming important since then. So in terms of long waves, I suspect that maybe when you talked about the wave crashing, Matt, that we are looking at perhaps the sixth long wave, and we are still grappling with how we make arrangements to make this productive. Now, turning to Vassilis' far-ranging and Indian-based analysis, which I really liked actually, it raises this issue about and this again is really ripe, fertile ground for STS, and that is the use of words, of language, of descriptions, and the actuality of what is going on the ground. And even in 1978, when I was looking at early stages of AI, it was quite clear that there was a huge discussion, excitement, although limited to specialist circles. I was invited to give seminars, and a typical response in the seminar was people asking what AI stood for, because they thought it stood for artificial insemination. The term artificial intelligence had not received a wider audience, but within the IT and computer sectors, it really was very vibrant. And the tension in the terms artificial and intelligence, together with all the ambiguities that Vassilis has so aptly characterized, has led this, that philosophers can have a word in this, sociologists can have a word in this, technologists can have a word in this, and above all, ordinary people now can have a word to say about artificial intelligence. And I think that that, again, is going to produce huge fertile ground for future analysis of the links between the level of description, the movability of terms, like the AI winters, which is something I'd noticed as well, that all that happened was that the research areas within AI, the scientists, redescribed themselves. So instead of being AI and putting their grant applications as AI, they called themselves theorem proving or natural language understanding or heuristic dendral or something like that. Something more focused, more practical. And I think there's always a tension between the wider potential and the philosophical excitement driven by science fiction and the reality. And here, I'd like to come back to the first point, the smallness of human beings and how we can understand that. And it relates to the question I asked about maths, that maths has got a history. And how do we know that our current maths is where it's going to end up? I think there's a huge scope, and I can imagine in the future, an AI future perhaps, there's going to be a far different, larger mathematics, where from that perspective, perhaps it's an extraterrestrial alien intelligence, far bigger than we are, or maybe it's just the future, if we survive and don't blow ourselves up in the meantime, looking back at this rather primitive beginnings of the information age. And I think that nothing is new under the sun. I mean, I have this sense of déjà vu when I hear the discussions about AI. And I think that Shakespeare had it quite well. And there's a quote that I always come back to, and he said, "As flies to wanton boys, so are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport." I think we should bear that in mind.